Nutrition labels are not as tightly regulated as we would hope. From a study back in 2006, the FDA had approved. You've just tuned into Rebel Wellness Podcast, your resource for realigning and revitalizing your health and well-being. I'm your host, Kaylee, also known as Coach Kales. I'm a holistic health educator, certified nutritionist, and fitness professional of nearly a decade. I'm stoked to have you with us. You just joined a community of amazing souls who are ready to break free from the confines of the often outdated and confusing health advice all around us. Living in a world overwhelmed by quick fix diets and unrealistic beauty and body standards, us rebels stand for change. If you're like me, you're exhausted with the confusion and polarization plaguing the social media health scene. My mission is to empower you to step beyond today's diet culture, adopt a holistic health approach paired with the foundations of science for lasting, well-rounded wellness. Through teaching you how to tune in and embrace your mind, body, and soul, we'll reject one-size-fits-all solutions, realigning you on a better path that honors your unique needs and values. With new episodes weekly, this podcast is your sanctuary for deep wellness exploration, featuring expert advice, real-life stories, and a true commitment to your growth. Your journey to better health and simplicity in life begins now. Let's jump right in. Welcome back to the show, Rebel. This is episode number 80, Hot Take Summer. Today, we are talking about nutrition labels, and I'm going to share a little bit of my hot take with you on how you can best understand the basics of the nutrition label so it's not as foreign seeming. And I'm going to debunk some of the improper ways I think that we've been kind of trained to look at labels. I think a lot of us just default to the calories and the sodium and maybe the sugar and then just freak out or just ignore it altogether. You know, there's a lot of different ways it goes. But today I really wanted to give you a little hot take on nutrition labels because it's been a very commonly asked thing throughout my career as a nutritionist, even when I was just training as well in the fitness space. Because, I mean, if you are trying to improve your health, one of the best ways to do that is through your food. And how do you know what you're eating if you can't read your nutrition label very well? So this is a really important conversation I wanted to discuss with you today. And I also wanted to share some of the pro tips of exactly how I kind of quickly breeze over labels and make decisions on the fly when I'm looking at them. And then I'll also share a little bit of how we can demystify phrases, like common misleading phrases that we tend to see on labels: all natural, natural flavors, light, low fat. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about that all the way at the end. So stay tuned to the end to get all of those tips and tricks. But I want to make sure that you know that where we're talking about here is really based upon the FDA, like how they've made these labels. So I'm going to kind of tell you that side first, and then I'm going to kind of discuss the nuancy part, you know, the part that you guys all love, you know, why you're listening to this podcast. If you are new to the podcast, this is a little bit of what I like to do here, but I'm going to discuss a little bit more of what is you should know, things that are not always discussed in the, you know, generic health world, because it takes some real life experience paired with understanding food science, the food production industry, a lot of different components there. So that's something we're going to discuss today. I hope that that is helpful to you at the end of this chat. I would love to know, you know, give us a rating, send me a DM. I guess with that said, come join our Instagram community at Rebel Wellness Podcast on Instagram, or at Kaylee Loren. That is my other coaching page that has a whole lot more of amazing resources for you to learn anything in the kind of harmonious health world of nutrition, fitness, and mindset. So we are bringing that all together for you on today's conversation about nutrition labels. Okay, because there is lots to be said about nutrition labels, I decided to split this episode into a two-parter for you guys, so that the first episode, we're going to dive really deep into everything you need to know about the basics of understanding, or more so, everything to know about understanding nutrition labels and a little bit of the history behind them and things that you should really know as to what goes into the FDA nutrition label. Second part of this episode, tune in for our best tips and tricks on how to avoid kind of cryptic food labels and things that don't actually mean what we have learned them to mean. Or I also just give you a little bit of insight into like what does it actually mean from a nutritionist standpoint. So that'll be part 2, as well as how I personally quick look at labels and deduce their health for myself. So part 2 is going to have all of that. Tune in next week for that episode. But for this episode, I really enjoy kind of breaking down the full food label. So again, I really will invite you to grab a food item, maybe ideally something that you eat frequently, so that you can kind of compare and listen along. But again, if you are not in a place where you can hold on to a nutrition label, like if you're driving, you don't have to do that to learn a lot. One more thing, I actually would love to invite you to head to my show notes if you want a more of a visual guide to nutrition labels and a whole lot more that I don't even discuss today in a free downloadable that you will be able to access through a link in the show notes, or you can go to my website, coachkels.com. I also would always love to invite you to come join our monthly wellness newsletter, and that is going to be coming up here soon. So if you join sooner than later, you're going to get right in when I send out the next one. So let's dive into this conversation. Okay, so before I go through top to bottom, looking at a nutrition facts label, I would recommend, honestly, that you pause this and maybe grab a food item from your pantry, maybe something that you eat frequently that has a full nutrition facts label on one of the sides so that you can kind of follow along and observe and learn a little bit more actively like that. I find that that is the most helpful. If you're driving, walking, whatever you're doing, you totally don't need to. I'm sure most of us can kind of picture that in our head because we've seen nutrition labels majority of our life, and they're nothing fancy, nothing new. Literally nothing has changed on them really over the years, which is a little bit, part of the problem. But at the same time, it's just one of the ways that the FDA here in the US tries to regulate and make more accessible to everyone, even though some of the stuff is not as accurate as it could be to the individual person. So let's talk about that for a moment. Nutrition labels are not as tightly regulated as we would hope. From a study back in 2006, the FDA had approved 28,000 food product labels, but failed to test what was on the label and see if whether or not it was accurate. So they approved them because it's a regulation that food items that are packaged have a nutrition facts label available for the consumer. However, they don't seem to truly care how accurate that label is. Some are held to a higher standard, especially if they're slapped with really fancy labels, USDA organic, non-GMO, that kind of stuff does have a more extensive process. However, when it comes to the other processed foods like the chips and the cookies and even supplements, unfortunately, even just dietary supplements that are, all supplements that are over the counter are not regulated, unfortunately. So that's why, kind of going back to my episode on supplements, I discussed that one of the really important things that you look for when you are getting supplements is that the company cares to third-party test, which means that they get a non-affiliated company to run tests on the quality and the accuracy of their supplements they're providing you. A lot of protein powders, a lot of pre-workouts, all these different things that a lot of us take consistently do not have to be checked for heavy metals, strange chemicals, plastics, the quality of the protein that they put in there, and time after time we get these things back where somebody else decided to randomly third-party test and they discover that the protein content of the scoop of protein is not actually even 25 grams. It's more like 12 grams. Cough, cough. Isopure back in the day and several other big brand name companies. And so it's a little bit, and I'm not talking about this to scare you guys. I really hope that you're not going to lose all faith in labels. However, it is really, important that we understand that so that we can navigate the food world better because there are food items that will pretty much always have accuracy of what's involved in it. Meaning, when we end up with whole food products, steak, broccoli, peaches, food that is exactly the way it came from wherever it was sourced, those have a higher chance of being exactly in its bioavailable nutrient status. Whereas you get a product like Banza pasta, throwback to my recent hot take summer on the Banza pasta. Listen to that if you have not already. We don't know what is actually inside these products until people do third-party test. And that is a little bit complicated and frustrating. I completely hear you. I completely am there. But those things are really important to talk about, because I think that it is really important to understand that just because something is regulated by a federal agency, there is a lot of failures that have been happening, especially, as more and more and more food product labels get submitted to be approved. Of course, they're not testing all these products. It would just be constant, and they would need so much labor to do that. So I do get why it happens. However, that does suck, because then you're not really sure if it is truly what it says on the label. So I wanted to preface with that. The other thing that's really interesting to discuss when we're talking about a little bit of the nuance before we talk about the label itself is that all the labels are based on, so where you see the daily values, DV, in the US, it's all based upon a 2,000 calorie diet. And that's what they have decided is the average amount of calories humans tend to eat daily. Kilocalories, calories, same thing. You might see kcal or calories. It's the same word. It means the same thing. It's how much energy it takes to burn that food item off. So how much energy you're consuming because of how much energy you're expending. And so when we look at a 2,000 calorie diet, majority of my adult clients, including myself, female and male, depending on their mass and activity level, they eat anywhere from 1,700 calories to 3,500 calories. Some of them even more than that. And that's really standard. Majority actually are eating roughly 2,100 to 3,000. A lot of us who might not, who eat out a lot or whatnot, you probably are closer to the 2,500 calories a day type of thing. So it's important to know your own daily calorie needs if you're going to pay attention to the daily values, the little percentage on the side of the nutrition label, because they may not fully apply to you directly, because if you are eating more calories, you need more for your daily value. And if you're eating less calories, you honestly probably nowadays still need more, but you may not need as much, So it kind of goes back and forth. And it's really important to understand that 2,000 calories is a decent average. But again, if you are a male, that's really low. So you need a lot more than whatever is based on the daily value. A lot more. I don't know any males that I have that I ever like to have them under 2,000 calories, simply due to their typical mass size as far as their height and their muscle mass. So do note that is really important to understand for yourself, because there is definitely a lot of nuance when it comes to daily values. Okay, and the final thing to note is that nutrition labels are in metric system. They're in grams, they're in ounces, milliliters, yada, yada. In the US, we use the imperial system. We don't use those same terms. And so a lot of we use tablespoons and teaspoons, we use cups. So a lot of the times it's confusing when you read the label and it's put in mostly grams. Honestly, I usually see grams, sometimes ounces. And so knowing that you may not understand what that looks like unless you use a scale to really measure it out is complicated. I have noticed that quite a few more food labels nowadays are actually using more of the imperial system when they have them listed, at least for the serving size, which is very helpful. Most cereals will now say 2/3 cup, because before it was always something around 55 grams, which is roughly a 2/3 cup for most cereals. And a lot of people may be like, I have no idea what that looks like. So my cereal serving is my cereal bowl size, How many of us have done that? I mean, my entire life growing up, I would have multiple bowls of cereal. I cringe to think how much food dye I consumed when I was in my elementary school age because my grandmother would let me have like 2 to 3 bowls of Fruity Pebbles. And I'm like, oh, God. But all to say, it's really important that you understand the differences between how things are measured, what counts as a serving size or not, because it is a little bit confusing because it's measured in ways that we don't actually measure things. So that's a little bit frustrating, but you can learn it pretty quickly. And for those of you like, my macro series, episodes 19 through 22, those are really important episodes to listen to if you are really keen on better understanding the food you eat, what makes up the food you eat, and all that jazz, because it's going to be super helpful for you to pair with reading the nutrition label because you're going to be real savvy on knowing exactly how to dissect carbs, fats, and proteins that show up on your label. Okay. So I definitely point you towards those episodes and the free downloadable if you're wanting to kind of increase all of your knowledge and experience after this to help your future choices and all of that. All right, so let's break down the nutrition label for the most basic way that I can describe each little part. Okay, so if we're looking at a nutrition facts label, we're going to go from top to bottom. So the top thing you're going to see, and one of the most important parts on the label, is the serving size. So you always want to start there because it's going to help you better understand the nutrition quality of the food item altogether. Because a lot of times you may see that you plan to eat the entire container, but a serving size is like, let's say 5 ounces, and there's 4 servings per container. So then you kind of have to do a little bit of mental math and multiply whatever that, maybe the calories, for example, times 4. And then you have to determine like, is that actually a meal or a food item that goes with my meal that actually makes sense for my daily calorie needs or the nourishment I'm looking for, yada, yada. And real quick, I do want to note that, reading the nutrition facts, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything needs to be perfectly clean, low ingredient, la, la, la. Yes, absolutely. Those are extremely important things that I will always encourage. If you follow an 80-20, 85-15, 90-10, that kind of lifestyle is going to serve you the best, longest, especially in a world that we have today. But it is good to know that like you can also observe a food label or the nutrition facts of some junk food item you're eating, kind of be like, wow, this is horrible. And I recognize that, and then still consume it and be okay. Finding that balance between better understanding what you're eating, why you're eating it, and all of that. And also knowing that you can still eat that, but just know that moderation is always best when it comes to portion sizes or food choices you make. And sometimes you might, like after this, now that you better understand the nutrition facts, you might look at some things and be like, holy cow, I had no idea I was eating this much fat, or I had no idea that this much sugar was added, and all of that kind of stuff. So back to the serving size. So you definitely need to know the amount of the food that the label is giving you information about. And it's helpful to know how many servings are contained in your package, like I just said, but you have to pay attention to that if you want to better understand what is a proper portion. And especially if you're somebody who struggles with knowing portions, because we've completely blown them out of proportion. But I don't think that's a pun because it literally involves the same word. But it has been blown out of proportion here in the US because we serve food at your table that is easily 3 to 4 servings per meal. So we start to learn the wrong amount of what should be eaten. And that's why a lot of Americans will go to like Europe and be like, they hardly serve you any food. It's like, well, actually that's the standard human body's portion size per meal. So that's something to note when you're looking at nutrition facts. Pay attention to the serving size and evaluate, is it what you expected? Again, I like to use a reference of an ice cream pint. If you plan to actually eat that little half pint, like a Ben & Jerry's pint, a Halo Top is a perfect example. Halo Tops are built to be eaten, the whole little thing in a sitting. They're pumped with a ton of air and, just a lot of things to make it quote unquote low calorie. However, they are meant to be eaten the whole thing. So you do want to make sure you read the part that says per container. A lot of nutrition fact labels, especially for food items that are meant to be eaten the whole thing, they will say they'll have a 2-column type of calorie and serving size thing where they'll show you first what the nutrition facts are for a serving, a recommended serving, and then that'll show you for the whole container. And those are because if they are an item that most likely will be fully consumed in one sitting, they need to not be as cryptic anymore, because in the past they were able to be kind of cryptic or sneaky or whatever word you want to use and be like, oh, this is per serving. So people would just like look at it real quick, look at the calories, be like, cool, I'm just going to eat this whole thing, and then realize, oh crap, that was for 3 servings or 2 servings or whatever. And so that they decided finally that that was not good. And so they have updated a little bit of the standard way that companies need to share nutrition facts on food items like that. Okay, next part would be calories. So you kind of want to check the calories per serving in relation to the serving size. So 100 calories in a 1 cup serving is a lot different than 100 calories in 1 tablespoon serving, right? A tablespoon of peanut butter, for example, is like 120 calories usually on average, and 100 calories in a cup of like a cup of cereal or something like that is going to be a lot different, a lot more volume. So calories aren't necessarily bad or good. What's really important to focus on is whether they come from nutrient-dense ingredients, so things that are going to give you a lot of good vitamins, minerals, and nourishment, or if they are just a lot of fluffery. We're going to talk more about that when we get into kind of the macronutrients that make up and the ingredients. But it is good to know that you can tell a lot about a food item by its calories when you better understand the calculations that correlate to the content of fat, carbs, and protein. I do want to take a quick second to remind you guys that every single food item is made up of macronutrients. It's not a mysterious word. Macronutrients are literally just carbs, fats, and proteins. Every single thing you eat has to have a variety of ratios of carbs, fat, and protein. Some only have fat, some only have protein, some only have carbs, some only have carbs and fat, some only have fat and protein. You know, things are always made up of macronutrients. They are what makes up the food you eat. It is what nutrients your body gets from food. If it doesn't have those, it is not food. Okay. So it's really important to understand that macronutrients are not confusing. 4 calories per gram for every carb and protein gram in a food item. 9 calories per gram for every fat in gram in your food item. So you can multiply each gram of fats by 9, each gram of protein and carbs by 4, and add that all together, and you'll get the calories that are on the serving size, okay? So that's really important to understand because it's not confusing and mysterious. I think a lot of people complicate macronutrients, and it's really simple. So they go hand in hand. You cannot have calories without macronutrients. Macronutrients are literally calories because they're literally the molecules that make up the food you eat. And then they communicate to your body once they are getting digested of what to do with them, okay? Fats are lipids. They do a lot of great stuff for our body, especially communicate with cholesterol. And cholesterol is what makes all of the hormones in your body and a whole lot more. Cholesterol is essential. So do not be afraid of cholesterol either. I'm kind of going already into the rest of this part of the label. So let's talk about that. So fat, again, very essential. You do want to make sure that you're seeing pretty much 0 grams of trans fat. And because we know it to be one of the worst fats for your health. Unfortunately, they came along once we got a little bit chemically savvy throughout the food industry history, and it was for partially hydrogenated. Usually you'll see the terms partially hydrogenated on it, and that denotes a trans fat. A lot of it was originally designed for shelf stability and stability of the product. However, we have learned that it is horrible for the human body and a bad chemical experiment. So we want to see 0 grams as much as possible on anything that we eat. However, there are sneaky ways that trans fats make their way into the food we eat. I always like to remind my clients that if you burn oil while you're cooking, you created a trans fat. So you do want to avoid that as much as possible. Clear the oil out, put some new oil in, turn the pan down, all that kind of stuff. Saturated fats. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to saturated fats. Again, I would definitely recommend you check out, I think it's episode 22, and make sure that you better understand them because there is a ton of nuance to saturated fat. Saturated fat is basically like coconut oil is a saturated fat, for example. And when people say that saturated fat innately is horrible for you, we would be seeing heart health issues in the tribes that were studied in Brazil that dominantly ate coconut oil, coconut products in general, alongside, plantains, bananas, animal meats that they hunted, all that kind of stuff, were generally active. They ate a ton of saturated fat. We would have seen a lot of cases of heart issues if it were due to the saturated fat itself. It actually tends to be a lot more due to carbohydrates that we mix in with saturated fat. So the standard American diet, it is recommended to eat no more than 25 grams daily total of saturated fat, ideally less than 20 grams for a lot of people. But if you are somebody who does not partake in a lot of processed carbohydrates, you eat mostly fruits, you eat mostly vegetables, you eat mostly tubers like potatoes, yams, all that kind of stuff. Like you're eating very natural, straight out of the ground carbohydrates, you will probably do just fine with saturated fat in your diet. But for those of you who do partake in bagels, processed foods, pastas, waffles, yada, yada, all that stuff, you probably should keep your saturated fat lower. So you do want to pay attention to that on the label. And then the next thing you're going to see is cholesterol. So cholesterol is only found in animal products because we make it in our body, because we have to create hormones and such. Plants do not need hormones. They do not need a lot of other things that are very important in living bodies that cholesterol does, like the point of cholesterol in our body. It's been demonized throughout the years. It is not a bad thing like a lot of people have painted it to be, and it can become bad if it becomes an excess and the particles that are considered your LDL cholesterol, if they start to gather up and block your arteries, that's the classic story that you've always heard. It's the waxy substance, la la la. Yes, but if it is only in large quantities, then it becomes problematic. We need it though. We do not want really low cholesterol unless you have some sort of genetic precursor or something like that. However, you do always want to evaluate your past family members' lifestyle and eating habits before you start to assume that everything is just genetic. I see that all the time. I get that asked all the time. There are genetic components, the epigenetics and all that different stuff can totally be a thing, but genetics load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. You have to pay attention to the lifestyle and see if you are actually living the same way. Are you eating the same way? Are you not as active too, or worse? Then yeah, maybe you should be paying attention to that if you have a long family history of high cholesterol and issues with heart health and all that stuff because of it. If you don't, cholesterol is not bad for you. We've debunked the whole thing about how high cholesterol foods like shrimp, eggs, all that jazz can cause issues with your own cholesterol. They've done a ton of studies now and have found that that is not true. We make the cholesterol in our body from different lipids and components of things that we consume, and we create the cholesterol itself. We don't eat cholesterol that has already been made from other animal products and then utilize it as an already made cholesterol. That's not how it actually works in our body. So I would not be overly concerned about the cholesterol unless, again, you have a specific reason behind it through something that you're working on with your medical practitioner. So again, take all of this advice with conversational ability. It is not medical advice, but it is very important that you better understand what cholesterol can mean on your nutrition facts and what it means typically in the food you eat. Okay. So the next part that you get to is sodium. A lot of people have, again, demonized sodium. It's an essential mineral and nutrient. We need it to stay alive, okay? It's probably one of the most important electrolytes that we consume every day so that we can stay hydrated and function normally. If you're getting a lot of cramps, like calf cramps and stuff, you're usually really low on sodium. Surprising, maybe not surprising. Most of my early career, especially in nutrition, because I heard all the standard jargon, sodium's bad for you, keep an eye on it, I hardly ever salted my food. I cooked most of my meals. So that meant that I was under consuming sodium because I was sweating at the gym, sweating doing cardio. At the time, I was your classic little cardio bunny, which is why I never encouraged that for a lot of my clients in their adulthood. But I also would not barely consume sodium unless I was like eating out and it was in the food I was eating without my control. And this was a problem because I do believe that I kind of existed chronically dehydrated for quite a while because I didn't have enough sodium in my body. And one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that it's water soluble. So when you overconsume sodium, assuming that you're consuming enough water daily, meaning 75 ounces or more a day, your body will flush out the excess sodium. So if you are somebody who consumes more sodium than the average person, drink a ton of water and your kidneys are going to do it all for you, okay? It is very, very important to understand that that is the mechanism at which your kidneys operate. They are your water balance in your body. And if you drink enough water, your body will balance out so much better with its minerals. So when you see sodium, it's just going to tell you how much salt per serving is in the food item that you're eating. You can go for lower sodium again if you're somebody who does eat out a lot. If you're getting fast food often or whatnot, you probably want to pay attention to orienting towards foods that are also lower on the sodium content zone. Soups and things like that, you're always going to see an excessive amount of sodium because they usually use like iodized salt or basic salts, and those require a lot more salt to be salty tasting. Things like sea salt and such are saltier tasting initially with a lot less sodium content. That's kind of a weird, interesting, nuancy thing that is important to understand. So when you're salting your food at home, you're actually not getting that much sodium, even though it tastes saltier. Because especially if you're using like Himalayan pink sea salt or any of that kind of stuff, or Maldon or whatnot, you're getting a saltier flavor to your palate and less sodium content. A lot of foods have a ton of hidden sodium through the quality of the salt they use, like iodized salt and all that different kind of cheaper salt is going to be a higher sodium content, but not taste quite as salty, or even higher so that it does taste salty. So that's something to pay attention to when you're looking at the nutrition facts for certain food items. All right, next part on the label that is typically a very important thing that a lot of people tend to look at is total carbohydrate. So total carbohydrate is going to denote the combination of sugars, dietary fiber, and just carbohydrates existing in the food item themselves. So you kind of want to look at it in relation to the list of ingredients. If the number is high, but the ingredients include more like nutrient-dense foods like lentils or whole grains, quinoa, etc., then that's pretty standard because those are starchy carbohydrate sources. I have a really great list that breaks down a ton of different macronutrient categories and the foods that correspond to them. If you want to better understand those, again, free download, coachkales.com, or you can go to my Stan store, stan.store/kales. Free download that is essential. I even send this to half of my friends that ask me questions because I'm like, know what makes up the majority of the food you eat. It's going to help you so much with better understanding these things. So if the carbohydrate grams are high and you see the major ingredients are like sugar sources, corn syrup, enriched flours, things like that, I usually wouldn't buy it because that's going to be not great for your blood sugar. It's usually going to be a high spiking food. However, if you're a very active person and you're picking out food to be a pre-workout, intra-workout, post-workout, or activity, it doesn't even have to be like a gym workout. You could be going mountain biking or whatever. Those are going to be quick sugars for you. So that food item is going to spike your blood sugar fast. So either you better use it or you have to be aware that you are going to spike your blood sugar. You could go on a roller coaster of blood sugar all day long, which can dictate your mood throughout the day, your energy throughout the day, etc. So pay attention to that when you're looking at the label, when you look at carbohydrates. Something to note is that a lot of people always wonder what exactly is net carb when, like, if you're doing keto or low carb or whatever. So total carbohydrate in grams minus your dietary fiber content of that food item is going to give you net carbs. Dietary fiber is always going to denote what content of that food you're eating aids in your digestive system by keeping you full between your meals, helping your intestines, feed the good bacteria, help your bowel movements be regular, all that stuff. So you really want to have a total of maybe 20 to 35 grams per day of dietary fiber throughout the foods you eat. A lot of people will reach that quickly if they're eating more whole grains, nuts, seeds, all that kind of stuff, because that stuff just kind of like moves through your digestive tract, scrapes all the gunk out, and helps you have regular bowel movements. That's really important for your health for a lot of different reasons. But that's important for you to look for. If you want to have something that is considered high fiber, it needs to have more than 5 grams of dietary fiber on the nutrition facts per serving. If it does not, it is not a high fiber food. It's a scam that they labeled it that way. So you always want to look for 5 grams or more. Typically, we want to see, this is a really good tip. Write it down if you want to remember it. Anything below 5% on the daily value, percentage of daily value section is not a good source of whatever that it is correlating to. So if it says dietary fiber has, 6 grams and it's at like 13% of your daily value, that is a better source of dietary fiber. For things like maybe fat, maybe it says it has 3% of your daily value. Not a really good source of fat. So you're not really eating that to get fat calories or fat, nutrients from it. But if the carbohydrates are like 20 grams and it says that it's roughly 30% or something like that of your daily value, then yeah, that is a good source of carbs. So paying attention to 5% or less is always going to not be a good source. And 20% or more is going to be a good source. Everything in between is just kind of meh. It's like it's there. It is more, it is more than less than 5%, obviously, but it's not necessarily a good source. Okay. So that's something that's a little nice trick to pay attention to if you're purchasing an item. Usually I see this related to protein, which I'm about to talk about that in here, but usually things will say they're high protein and then like the daily value will like somehow be absent. Like for some reason, sometimes it completely skips giving the percentage of your daily value for protein because people argue left and right constantly about how much protein people should have a day. My generic advice is if you are somebody who is looking to have longer muscle mass retention, if you're looking to have better quality skin, if you're looking to stay fuller longer, if you're looking to have balanced blood sugar, you should have roughly anywhere from 80 grams to 130 grams of protein a day for a standard female. For males, no less than 100 grams a day, and maybe no more than 180 grams per day. It becomes excess protein for most males when you exceed 200 grams. That's for a standard mixed plate diet. That is not for people who follow keto, for people who follow paleo, for people who follow veganism, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of different recommendations for that, but we're not going to talk about that today. But I would say if you would like to kind of gauge where your protein should be at, I usually don't like to see people any less than 80 grams for my females and no less than 100 grams for my males. That's a really good rule of thumb for, again, achieving all those things that I listed. So last part of the carbohydrates is sugars. This is a really important one for you to pay attention to because we try to keep this number as low as possible, especially because if it's processed food, it can be really problematic for, especially, like I just said, managing your glucose spikes, blood sugar control, avoiding insulin resistance in the future. Okay. So we do really want to keep this usually less than 8 grams of sugar per serving. Sometimes I go anywhere from less than 8 to 12 grams per serving is a good rule of thumb. But I mean, if you're purchasing food items that are like dominantly sugar, you're not going to really, I mean, it's going to be all sugar. And you should see the nutrition facts be like, it's only carbohydrates in here. There is no fat and there is no protein. So it is kind of a good way to keep things honest when you're looking at labels and you see that way. But as far as sugar goes, you're going to pay attention to how much sugar. If it exceeds 12 grams or so, look again straight to the ingredients label and evaluate what sugars are in here. There's oftentimes nowadays more than just one type. Sometimes you'll just see cane sugar. A lot of times now you'll see brown rice syrup. Anything ending with ose, O-S-E, is always going to be a sugar source. Invert sugar, malt syrup. There's a whole lot of different terms for it. That little downloadable I made has a list of things that are common offenders, frequent flyers, as far as what goes into ingredients that are actually just sugars. It's a red flag. Oh, I can't forget high fructose corn syrup, one of the worst ones that we tend to see added into things. Red flag, I personally don't purchase anything that has high fructose corn syrup. There's a lot of different ways that people view that additive. I like to get my sugar from a lot of different places. If you've never tracked your macros or you've never tracked your calories in a macronutrient guide before, like MyFitnessPal, this would be a good thing for you to do at least like 1 or 2 days. Just be completely judgment free of yourself. Just log as closely to what you're eating as possible and see where you land. It's extremely eye-opening. Most people find that they're really low on protein. Most people find that they're really high on carbs. Maybe they're really high on fats. This is why they're storing a lot of fat typically. And then you also will see you're eating upwards of 80 to 120 grams of sugar a day, and that is just far too much. I don't usually like having my female clients eat more than 65 grams of sugar a day, and usually that sugar, we like it to come from like fructose, aka fruits, or other naturally occurring things like lactose coming from, their yogurts or any other things like that. Stevia, monk fruit, those are all great glucose spike resistant sugars that you can add if you want more sweetness. But again, aiming for natural sources, honey, maple syrup, those are going to be the best ways for you to sweeten things. Do not think that agave is healthier than anything else. Agave is extracted from the agave plant the same way that cane sugar is extracted from the cane sugar plant. So unfortunately, that is another one of those foods that's kind of a scam as far as thinking it's healthier. Its name and how it looks like it would be healthier, but it's the same thing as cane sugar in the body. Okay. So knowing your sugars is really important, and it is very helpful when you're looking at labels to become a little more savvy on what sugars compose the food you are eating. Okay. So back to protein. Now we're going back to the protein is right after the sugars on the label. Because it is such an important macronutrient, again, for all those other reasons I listed, building muscle, fighting infection, a whole lot of stuff, we really want to have a good amount of protein in your day. If you're a listener and you're not a weightlifter, I would really recommend you don't eat less than 50 grams of protein a day, depending again on your size as well. But you will always have success consuming more protein, higher protein foods every day than you will having less protein. There is no way you could ever overconsume protein. Try eating 18 chicken breasts for your day. That's not going to happen. You're never going to overeat protein because you get so satiated by it, and it's literally mostly just built out of amino acids. Sometimes you're going to get fats from natural animal fats that are involved with it. There's no carbs. No carbs are ever combined with protein naturally. Okay, so you're going to find out that protein is the most energy efficient food item that you can consume. Reducing your protein, unless you're somebody with kidney failure, is never a good idea. Okay, so highly recommend you focus on the protein whenever you can. If you're looking on your nutrition facts, you want to see if you're looking for a protein source, it needs to, again, be more than 20% of your daily value or so to be considered a good protein source. A lot of things say high protein, and they literally they have like 12 grams of protein per serving. Sometimes they have like 8. And I'm like, that is not a good protein source. That's like a little snack of protein. That's like a little sprinkle, like you're sprinkling protein on top of my day. That is not a good way to gauge it. I usually, if you want to go for grams, like if you want to have grammage in your head of how much I would recommend, I would say no less than 15 grams of protein per serving if you're looking for it as a protein source, okay, for your meal. All right. After that, you're going to be getting into your vitamins and minerals. A lot of this can be kind of arbitrary. We don't know what source of vitamins or what variation therefore is in the food item. So some things have artificial like iron and calcium and stuff like that added in. A lot of the times it's not bioavailable. Sometimes it is. But I would say I usually kind of ignore some of the vitamins and mineral content because it's, again, based off of a 2,000 calorie diet. And if you are active, if even if you just weight lift 3 to 4 times a week, you're already needing more vitamins and minerals than the average human. If you're highly stressed, you need more vitamins and minerals than the average human. If you just had a baby, or if you had a baby within the last 5 years, you need more vitamins and minerals than the average human every day. So you should probably be taking some good quality supplements, pure encapsulations, vital nutrients, designs for health. There's a whole bunch of great companies out there. Thorne, I guess. They're all great companies that you can get high quality bioavailable supplements to help those nutrient stores. But ultimately, aside from even supplements, you should be eating good quality, whole grain, whole foods in general, not just whole grain, high quality animal proteins, high quality fruits and vegetables, ideally on the organic side if you're trying to reduce your chemical exposure. Cooking things from home, baking things from home, you're going to reduce the ingredients and chemicals added in. So you're going to get a lot more nutrients naturally from those foods. So highly recommend you pay attention to getting those nutrients from the food you eat and higher quality supplements. I would not really pay attention to the nutrition facts because they can be iffy and they're not going to really do a whole lot for you. They're not going to necessarily do nothing, but they're not going to do a whole lot. Okay. So slightly ignore those. And the footnotes at the bottom of the panel kind of explain the daily value percentages. Again, it's always very generalized, so I don't usually pay attention to that because it's going to not help you the most, and it might just confuse you more. So, and again, they don't usually test each food item, so we don't actually know if any of that stuff is actually true. It might have been from the first batch when they were trying to put the product on the market and they ran it. And then since then, maybe they've slightly altered their ingredient sourcing or any of that stuff, and it may not actually even be true anymore. So again, overall, I would just kind of ignore the daily value for vitamins and minerals because unfortunately, it's not going to be that good of a source, but you could always observe it because perhaps it is true or perhaps it is helpful, And then on the last part on your list, you're going to see the ingredients. It's one of the most important aspects of the label. It is going to be a major part of what I look at when I tell you this next part of this conversation, but you really want to look for real food ingredients, food that you can pronounce. If it's confusing to you, it's confusing to your body. So avoid anything that is kind of sounds really chemically or altered chemically, avoid enriched flour because that means it was stripped. The wheat itself was completely stripped of all of its nutrients while it was processed, and then they enriched it by adding back vitamins and minerals. And again, there's a lot of evidence that points towards a lot of those minerals and vitamins that they add back in do not actually get absorbed and utilized in the body properly because they are not part of the food in the way that it was most naturally meant to be. And you'll see a lot of people, struggling with nutrient deficiency because they eat so much of these enriched foods in general. Well, a lot of cereals are enriched with things, for example. Hydrogenated oils are a no-go, and artificial flavors and colors and refined sugars are a no-go. So pay attention to that. You really want to pay attention to, seeing red dye, blue dye, different colors of those things. We have a lot of evidence now and a lot of research backing the challenges that come with consuming high amounts of these added foods that were generally recognized as safe by the FDA. And now we're realizing it could be pointing towards a lot of things like autism and ADHD and a variety of other things that actually have been starting to get proven through research. So it's best that you avoid that if you're looking at the nutrition facts, or at least that you're aware of it. Again, if you're eating foods like candies that are always going to involve all of those things, highly processed sugars, coloring, a lot of chemicals, you're going to see that in almost all candy, especially sour candies and stuff like that. You're just going to be signing up for challenges if you consume those consistently. Consistently meaning either daily, weekly, or monthly. That is a lot that adds up over time, and you can start to have a lot of complications if you choose to eat those too much, So it's just something to be aware of. It's not something that's going to be the death of you unless, again, you are consuming it in high frequency. All right, Rebels, that wraps up part 1 of the nutrition label conversation. I know I probably left you hanging on the edge trying to find out what I would say are the most words on nutrition labels, as well as how I personally just quick look at nutrition labels and break it down. So if you are really interested in that, don't worry. Next week, part 2 is going to be live. So I hope that you learned something from today, and go back, listen to it again if you need to, and make some notes and, all that kind of good stuff, and start to learn a little bit more about the foods you eat. Again, I really encourage you to look at stuff now that you have more knowledge, anything that you eat frequently. So if you have it at least once a week or at least a couple times a week, that will be really important for you to kind of gain a little bit of awareness and mindfulness around. As always, celebrate your strength and nourishment, walk with confidence, and I will catch you on another episode of Rebel Wellness. What did you think about that episode? If you enjoyed it, I hope that you would come join my community on Instagram at Rebel Wellness Podcast, or my coaching page at Kaylee Loren, or both. I would love to see your name pop up on my new follows list. I might say hello if I catch you. And I would also like to invite you to come check out my website, coachkales.com, if you're interested in seeing any more of the educational learning resources I have created for you. I have a whole ton of amazing free downloads that you can dip your toe in the water of what working with me looks like. And if you are really vibing with what I have to say and how I teach it, come explore my courses that are available for purchase. They are all do it yourself. In the near future, I plan to have some awesome group coaching that will be all live. So stay tuned for that. And the best way to know when I'm going to launch those is through my monthly wellness newsletter, which is my hand curated, not AR generated, monthly all things health and wellness newsletter that I created to be your new favorite resource for staying up to date with the latest in the health world, self-care resources that I've created, and a bunch of the clean beauty picks that I personally use myself, and a whole lot more, as well as early access and discounts to anything that I create in the future for specifically my newsletter sign up. So if you'd like to sign up, head to coachkales.com and add yourself to my mailing list. Last but not least, I would absolutely love it if you would help our podcast grow by simply sharing a rating or review wherever you stream and are listening to me right now, and share it on your social medias or text it to some friends or family members if this episode resonated and was something that you think could help somebody else, because I really would love to help anybody in your circle if I've been helping you. So I absolutely am so grateful that you're here. And if you listened all the way through, you are a real one. So, all right, Rebel, until next episode.